This happened when I was a freshman in high school. I was a young 14-year-old girl and immature. For most of the school year, things went pretty well. Later on, towards the end of the year, I had gotten used to being in high school. I remember that one Friday afternoon after school, I was leaving to head to my bus. There were quite a few other people around, mostly students also leaving the school. When I was walking along the sidewalk just outside the school, this guy came up to me. I didn't recognize him or know who he was, but I figured that he was an upperclassman, maybe a senior, possibly a junior. He said hi to me and, "How's it going?" or something like that. Then he asked me if I was doing anything later. I did not have any plans. He told me that there was going to be a big party that night and said that I should go. Then he gave me an address and I wrote it down in the notes of my phone. After that, I had to catch my bus and the guy said that he would see me tonight. He told me that, quote, everyone was going to be there. Now, I hadn't known the guy, but he looked like he was probably popular to me, and the fact that he was an upperclassman made him seem more cool. And admittedly, I wanted to be cool, and I did not want to miss out on a big party. At that time, I had never been to an actual party before, just some small get-togethers with people in my friend group. No official house parties or anything. I didn't know why the guy seemingly randomly asked me, but I didn't really care about it either. I did not ask any of my friends if they had been invited either, because if they hadn't, I didn't want them to get mad. So, when the time came, I looked up the address. It wasn't that far away, maybe like 7 or 8 minutes. I got my older sister, who was 16, to drive me there. I would always get her to drive me places. She dropped me off in the neighborhood and it looked kind of sketchy. It was a quiet neighborhood without much lights. I walked up to the property and I could see a house deep in the yard. In this neighborhood, most of the houses were fairly far apart and had large-sized properties. I double-checked the address and it was definitely correct. I walked into the property and there were no cars around and all the lights in the house appeared off. It was like nobody was home. But I figured that with it being a house party for high schoolers, they didn't want it to be obvious. Most likely the party was in the basement, or else they purposely had the front lights off to not alert any neighbors. As I walked up to the house, I still heard nothing though. It was completely silent. I would have thought if it was a party, there would maybe be some music in the distance or something. When I got to the doorstep, I didn't want to knock on the door or ring the doorbell. That's not really something you do at a house. They would probably think the cops were there or something if I did. I stood there on the front step looking around for a few moments. Then I decided to try the door. When I did, it was unlocked. I slowly opened the front door and saw a pantry and part of a living room. All the lights were indeed off. The house looked pretty average for the most part from what I remember. I stepped inside and started to walk around to try to find the basement. It was still completely quiet, and the farther I walked into the house, the more of a bad feeling I got. I was already a little nervous going to a house party where I didn't think I would know anyone. So, as I was walking in the house, I suddenly heard footsteps. They were coming from the other room and going towards me. I couldn't see who it was, and for whatever reason, my instant reaction was to just leave. I turned around and bolted back for the front door. I made it there, walked out, and left the house. Then I walked back to the street. When I got there, I looked at the house again. I saw a man looking at me from the window. He was not the same guy that I had talked to before. This man looked like he was in his 30s. He had a goatee beard, was wearing a hat, and just looked at me. He didn't say anything or go outside. I walked down the street and then called my sister. She wasn't far away and came back and picked me up. Thankfully, she was confused because I had told her I was meeting friends there. I told her what happened and she scolded me for trying to go to a random party, but she agreed not to tell our parents. Now, after that, I never saw the guy who invited me to the party again. In all my years of high school, I never found out who he even was. It makes me wonder if that guy was even a high school student at all. Maybe it was all a setup. I mean, there was definitely no house party going on there. I'm just glad that I made it out of there, okay? And I learned my lesson from that experience. This happened back on the night of my high school orientation. So, I was entering the ninth grade and would be a freshman in high school. My best friend Josh and I went to the school orientation, and Josh's dad took us there. He was busy talking with another dad in the cafeteria, which was at the front of the school. And Josh and I went to the orientation. There was a thing in the gymnasium where people welcomed us and stuff. Then we went to all the classrooms in our schedules and would see where they were and things like that. We also got a basic tour of the school. The orientation lasted for maybe 30 minutes or so. It really wasn't that long. After it was over, Josh's dad was still busy talking with the other dad. Josh and I decided to walk around the school some more and just shoot the bull. So, we walked down the hallways first and looked where each other's classes were. We did have one class together, which was cool. Then we went to our locker area. By then, pretty much everybody else was gone, and the hallways were completely empty. We walked through the school and then to this one really quiet hallway. It was kind of out of the way and possibly not used anymore. I say this because it was not shown to us on the tour. And I will also tell you that I never had any classes in this hallway in my entire high school career. So we walked into it and barely any lights were on. Most of the lights in the school were motion activated, but when we walked into this hallway, none of them turned on. There were just a couple of really dim lights at each end. We walked into the hallway just kind of exploring. All the classrooms there appeared to be empty and the doors were closed, although we couldn't see very well because it was pretty dark. We had made it a little ways down the hallway when we heard a noise towards the end of it. Somebody was down there. I figured at first it was probably a janitor. Then we heard them speak. It was a man's voice and he yelled at us to come over there. I didn't know if we were in trouble or what. He didn't seem angry, but he yelled fairly loud. I also couldn't see where he was. It seemed like maybe he was inside one of the classrooms. We walked down there. As we got closer, we noticed there was one classroom at the end of the hallway with the door open. We knew this is where the guy was. We got to the doorway and looked inside. It was completely pitch dark. Then the man spoke again. He said, "Come in here, you guys." We both walked in, and I literally could not see anything. I looked around inside the door for a light switch, but I couldn't find one. We were just a few steps inside the classroom and stood around. Josh called out, asking where the guy was. There was no answer to that. We were just standing there really confused. Suddenly, I felt myself get grabbed by the arm. I couldn't see anything, so it really took me by surprise. I moved my arm back really fast and turned around. Josh saw me moving quickly, and he started to leave the room as well. We both bolted out of there as fast as possible. We ran to the end of the hallway and then all the way back to Josh's dad, who was still talking with the guy that had called to us did not appear to leave the classroom. We stayed near Josh's dad for the next 30 minutes or so until he was done talking. Then we left. Like I said before, in my entire high school career, I never had a class in that hallway. For the whole freshman year, I would sometimes walk by the narrow entrance to that hallway and remember the creepy experience. It was a hallway that was not used. After my freshman year, they closed the doors to the hallway and it was blocked off. Then the year after I graduated, they renovated the entire school and either demolished that part or turned it into modern classrooms. Either way, I still don't know who that man was or what exactly was going on. It still gives me the creeps to remember it, though. Back when I was in high school during my sophomore year, I used to go to the local library a lot after school. I lived pretty close by to the high school behind it in a neighborhood. I would walk to school every morning. And then after school, there was a city library really close by that I liked to go to. It was in the opposite direction than going home, but it was literally like a 5-minute walk from the school. You just had to cross a street and then go a little ways down. The high school did have a library, but I found it to be kind of lame, and some of the school clubs would meet in there after school anyways. So I preferred to just go to the city library. I would usually spend about an hour or two there, sometimes more. I would try to do all my homework as well as studying there, so when I went home I could then do whatever I wanted. It was easier to focus in the library as well, and I also found it to be pretty relaxing. The city library was nice. It was large, had every book you would want, and also had a lot of tables for studying, as well as several computer labs. So, one day during that sophomore year, classes let out for the day, and I walked across the street and down to the library. I went inside and then went towards the back, where I found an open area of a few tables kind of out of the way. There was nobody else there, and it was my favorite spot to do homework at. I sat down, took out my books and folders, and began working. Probably about 10 to 15 minutes into this, and some guy walked up to me. I remember that he had a red t-shirt on and dark brown, really short hair. He looked young, but to me looked like he was maybe 25 or so. He didn't seem like a teenager at all. He did, however, have a backpack with him, so I thought that maybe he was a college student. Either way, I had never seen him before. He walked right up to me, though, and mentioned my high school and asked if I went there too. With him asking that, it implied that he also went to my high school. I had never seen this guy before, like I said, and I wouldn't have guessed that he was a high school student at all. I said, "Yes, do you go there?" He said, "Yes," and then asked if I minded if he did his homework in that area as well. I didn't want him to, but I also didn't want to be rude, so I said, "Sure." And I was only using one of the tables when there was like 5 of them there. He didn't really have to ask permission to be at one of those tables. So the guy walked around me and then went to the table directly behind mine. I couldn't see him anymore now that he was behind me, but I heard him sit down. It seemed as though he was sitting right directly behind me and facing me. I just continued with my homework, and it was completely silent. I was able to work for about 10 minutes or so, but then I realized that I hadn't heard the guy do anything. He hadn't taken anything out of his backpack. No books, no laptop, no notebooks or pencils, and he wasn't making any sounds at all. I was making a little bit of noise with turning pages and writing stuff down, things like that. But there was nothing from the guy. He seemed to just be sitting there behind me doing nothing. And I got this sense that he was staring at me, like that feeling you get when somebody is watching you. I didn't want to just turn around, so I tried to be slick. I stopped to stretch and sort of looked around at another spot behind me. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the guy. He indeed had nothing out. There were no books or anything on the table in front of him, and he wasn't on his phone either. He was just sitting there seemingly looking at me. It kind of seemed weird. I tried to just ignore it though, so I kept working. But the longer I did, the more and more I got paranoid. The guy didn't do anything at all. He was just sitting there. I turned around another time and this time got a better look. He was looking at me and then looked away right after we made eye contact. There was still nothing in front of him, and his backpack was still on his back. By this point, my focus was gone. I could no longer concentrate on what I was doing. I just wanted to leave. I sat there staring at my homework paper for like 5 more minutes and not being productive at all. Finally, I decided to leave. I pretended to finish and then started packing my things up. The man was still sitting there and didn't move the whole time I did. After putting everything back in my backpack, I stood up, picked up my bag, and began to walk away. I didn't look at the guy at all, but when I turned, out of the corner of my eye, I saw him standing up as well to leave. That's when I had a really bad feeling. I walked to the front of the library and then left. When I was about 20 feet out, I heard the doors open and knew that it was the same guy. I walked quickly to the sidewalk. Then, I breathed a small sigh of relief when I saw the guy getting into a car that was in the parking lot. I kept walking and was now on the sidewalk going home. I went down the street and then crossed back towards the school. Shortly after I passed the school, I saw the same car that the man had gotten into driving up the road to pass me. Then it went a ways ahead of me and turned into a small parking lot. This lot was for a park across the street from the school, but it was also used for extra school parking. It was completely empty by this time. As I continued to walk, I saw the car park in a spot facing the street. The man did not get out. I kept walking, just hoping that I would get away from the guy and never see him again. Eventually, I passed it. It was on the other side of the road, so I didn't get a good look at him. But I know he was still inside the car, and the engine was still running. Now, I just had to pass a couple more streets, and then I would take a right for my street. As I walked, I noticed the car start to leave the parking lot. It backed out of its space and then headed towards the road again. I was walking by several residential streets. Now, as I saw the car pull back onto the road, I felt like the guy was going to follow me. So I quickly turned into one of the streets that I was closest to. I heard the car now on the other street getting closer. I went down the residential street and then went up the first driveway that I saw. There were some trees in the front yard, so I ran up and hid behind one. I saw the car turn in down the street and start to drive really slow. When it had passed me, it kept going, but I had to wait until it was almost out of sight. Then I quickly ran out from behind the tree and back towards the sidewalk. I made it back to it and then started sprinting for my street. I made it there, but then saw that the car was now starting to go down my street from the other end. It must have wrapped around because all the roads over there connected. I ran back and then went to the next street over and into another random person's front yard. I waited until I could hear the car moving away. Eventually, I turned back to another nearby street. I got up and ran again, this time making it to my street once more. I ran to my house and was finally able to make it home. I got inside and locked the door. Then I watched out the front window and actually saw the car driving by again, really slow, but I don't think he knew which house was mine. After that, I never saw the guy again. Looking back, I know that he didn't go to my school. He was way too old to be a high school kid. That was one of the creepiest encounters I've ever had, and I'm glad that I got away from him. This happened back when I was in high school. It had to be either my freshman or sophomore year because those were the only 2 years that I rode the bus. School started at 7:45 a.m., but the bus would come by my stop to pick me up at 6:30. Well, it was supposed to be 6:30, but the bus would often show up at more like 6:50 or even 7. To get to the bus stop, I would walk down my street to the end of it. Then the bus would stop there and I would get on. I was the only kid at that particular stop who rode the bus, and there weren't any other stops in the immediate area. It was a pretty quiet area because in my neighborhood, the yards were a little bigger and the houses farther apart. There was less traffic on the roads as well, especially at those hours. Across the street from the bus stop were some woods and houses spread out pretty far. So one morning, I walked down my street to the end where the bus stop was. I got there at about 6:30, but figured I would probably be waiting for a good 10 or 20 minutes, like normal. I'm not sure why the bus was always so late because my stop was only the third one of the morning. Every now and then the bus would show up perfectly on time though, so you could never depend on it to be late. So I stood out there in the dark because the sun hadn't come up yet. It was very quiet and there were no other cars on the roads at all. I waited and waited. I was pretty tired from having to get up so early, like I often was in high school. Then I noticed headlights in the distance. I figured that it had to be my bus. When it came closer, I noticed that it was in fact a bus, but not mine. It looked different. It slowed down when it got closer to me. Then I noticed that this was not the typical bus. My bus was the normal standard yellow school bus, but this one was like a really light yellow, almost white. It was slightly shorter than usual and looked older and more beat up. Now in the past, one time we had a different bus for whatever reason, and I had a substitute bus driver once as well, so I thought that maybe that was the case. But when that happened, the bus had actually looked newer and in better shape. Something about this just gave me a bad feeling. The bus slowed down even more. The bus slowed down even more and then came to a stop right across the street from me for me to get on. I did not cross the street. I started to get a bad feeling like I should not get on the bus. I looked and could see the driver. It was not the usual bus driver that we had. This guy had a dark gray and also part black beard. He was wearing a hat as well and looked over at me. I just kept standing there. Then he waved at me to get on the bus. I almost went. I think I might have even took a step, but I thought better of it. I stayed where I was and then waved for the bus to go forward without me. It did not. The bus driver had the door open and he shouted for me to get on. I looked in the windows and could see that there appeared to not be any other kids on the bus at all. Normally, there would be 3 other kids on the bus at that point, as I was the 3rd stop, and one of the stops before me had 2 kids at it. So this was just really weird. I said no and then turned around and started to walk away. I was going back towards my house, and then something unexpected happened. As I was walking back down my street, I heard the bus turn onto my street behind me. I looked back, and it was indeed going onto my street, something that had never happened before. At that point, I started to run. That's when the bus stopped. I then heard the beeping as it backed up and then turned around and went back onto the busier road in the direction that it had come from. I was so confused. I stopped and then went back to the bus stop, feeling really creeped out now. That bus was nowhere in sight anymore as it had drove away. I stood there in silence, wondering what had just happened. I was glad that I didn't get on that bus, though. I figured that if it was somehow the bus I was supposed to be on, I could tell my mom that I missed it and she would drive me to school. That's something that happened a few times before. And even though it took my mom out of the way to get to her job, she could still do it. I stood there at the bus stop and the time approached 6:50. Then I saw more headlights. Another bus drove down the street. I thought at first that it was the same bus coming back, but it wasn't. This was actually my correct bus, the same one as usual. I saw a few students on already, and the bus stopped for me. I crossed the street and got on. It was the normal bus driver and students. I don't think I was ever so happy to see them before. I got on the bus, went to my seat, and then rode the bus to school, wondering what would have happened had I got on that other bus. I never saw that other bus again. To this day, I wonder who it was driving it and why he drove to my stop. Was it something innocent, like a substitute bus driver who just got lost or got his route mixed up or something? Or was it something terrible, like a kidnapper trying to pose as a bus driver? I'm not sure, but I'm so glad that I listened to my instincts and didn't get on that bus. I went to a pretty average high school. There were maybe 800 students total, and the school was 2 stories tall with a bunch of classrooms. This was during my junior year. It was a normal school day, and I don't remember a whole lot about the day prior to this. It was my 3rd hour class, which was a history class. The classroom was on the 2nd floor of the school in this quiet and narrow hallway. These classrooms had carpet floors and always felt cozier than the other ones to me. This class was not a standard history class either, but some type of advanced elective. I don't remember the exact name of it. It was a long time ago, but the teacher was really cool, especially with our class, because it was a small class. There were maybe 15 of us total in the class, as opposed to the normal class size of like 30 kids. There was no seating chart, so we would sit wherever we wanted. This teacher, who I would call Mr. J, was a pretty cool guy. He had been teaching at the school for many years, and most people liked him, as far as I'm aware. His room was rather cluttered, but I didn't mind at all. In the back of it were these large closet type of cabinets, and there were tons of posters on the wall and stuff. He had other kinds of knickknacks and trinkets all around. So I got to my typical seat for the class, which was at the far back of the room. There was nobody else who sat behind me, and I could focus better kind of by myself back there. On this particular day of class, Mr. J put on a video for us to watch. There was a worksheet to go with it, and we all watched the video. It took pretty much the entire hour. Things were very quiet, and the lights were out in the room so we could see the screen better. The only real sounds were coming from the video, which was a documentary. I remember, though, during the film, I heard some noises behind me. They were pretty quiet, and I couldn't hear them that well, but it sounded like somebody was in the classroom behind me, but nobody was. I was in one of the last rows, and I even looked back, but nothing was there. It was sort of confusing. The noises continued on and off for almost the entire hour. After a while, though, I chalked it up to them being from the next classroom over. After the film was done, we talked about it a little bit, and then turned in the worksheets, and then were dismissed. I headed out with all the other students and went back towards the locker commons. However, when I was almost back at my locker, I realized that I didn't have my phone. It must have fallen out of my pocket when I was in the history class. Realizing this, I headed back to the room. When I got back to the room, the door was closed. I didn't bother knocking, but just opened it. When I did, I suddenly saw this random guy fighting Mr. J. When I opened the door, he stopped for a moment and looked at me. Then he continued, seemingly trying to fight Mr. J. Mr. J yelled to call the police. They were near the desk, and this guy did not appear to be a student, but did look fairly young. I looked and saw my phone on the ground by my desk. I couldn't call the police because I didn't have my phone. I was just standing there frozen, unsure of what was going on. The man threw a few punches and Mr. J was blocking them. Finally, I came to my senses. I went into the room and tried to break up the fight. I went to pull the guy off Mr. J, but he was stronger than me. Mr. J was able to break free just enough, though. The guy was big and also bigger than Mr. J. But my teacher then grabbed the guy and made him fall backwards. Then he got on top of him and pinned him to the ground like a wrestler. He told me again to call 911. I went over, grabbed my phone, and hit 911. Then I ran out and got the attention of some other nearby teachers. They were able to help out and hold the guy down until the cops got there. It was a crazy scene, and the school got locked down for a little while. It turns out the noises I heard behind me were that guy. He was hiding in one of the cabinets at the back of the classroom. I'm not sure why he hated Mr. J, but he did. He must have snuck in there before classes started or something, or if Mr. J left the room for a moment. It's really crazy to think back to it now. When class was over, he came out and attacked him. I'm glad that I went back when I did. Luckily, nobody had any injuries, just some scrapes and bruises. The guy was arrested and the school day was able to resume as normal.